I'm Nick Knudsen, joined by Will Miles. Welcome to Stand Up and Holler. On tonight's episode, we will recap the national championship game quickly. Billy Napier reels in another big commit, this time from running back Trevor ETN. Rob Sales hired as the offensive coordinator from the New York Giants staff, and we'll wrap up with a few roster updates. Will, I say we just bite the bullet and get on with 2 bits here, man. There's no sense in beating around the bush here. Georgia, national champs. You recruit like that, eventually you should break through. It's amazing they didn't do it sooner. And I did want to provide a few facts, though, before we dive into it. Since Georgia won its last national title, the internet was invented. The Cold War ended. Soviet Union fell, of course. Pluto was stripped of its planetary status, and 7 U.S. presidents have held office. So before I offer my congratulations to the Georgia Bulldogs, I would just like those facts to go on the record. Kirby Smart and those Bulldogs, they finally get over the Bama hump. They knock off the Crimson Tide 33-18 to capture the school's first national title since 1980. We won't be hearing that phrase as much anymore. This was a game that the defense just played. You know what? We said the first go round. I didn't feel it was Stetson Bennett that cost them the game. He didn't help any, and he didn't help a lot on Monday night. He had a couple of nice throws. He had a clutch drive after a big mistake, by the way. I know he's the guy that's getting all the attention, but man, that defense played well. And I thought the Bama defense, for the most part, did its job too. And that's what we did not see in Atlanta. Bryce Young was completely under pressure all night. I felt like almost every throw he was stepping into, he had a defender in his face. And this Georgia defense did what it's done all year. They showed up. They played the way they've played all year. And the Bulldogs, they finally pulled it off, Will.
Yeah, you mentioned things that have happened since 1980. So Jimmy Carter was the president back in 1980. And hey, Jimmy Carter's the president in 2022 as well, based on our inflation numbers and all that sort of stuff. So things come around eventually. So hopefully it's 2061 before we're talking about another Georgia championship.
Long time.
Alabama dominated the first half and they were up 9-6. And that really is the story of the game, is that there were multiple opportunities. I think the tight end was open in the end zone, dropped the pass. Nakobe Dean got all over the other linebacker, and then they sacked Bryce Young back at the 20 and forced him to kick a field goal. You come out in the second quarter, Bryce Young throws an interception. Then they have a nice long drive where they kind of ran it down Georgia's throat. You get the missed field goal, and then Georgia gets the big play by James Cook, gets the touchdown to go up 13-9. Alabama comes back down a 10-play drive, has to settle for a field goal to make it 13-12. That, and then you do get the Stetson Bennett fumble, which I think was probably an incomplete pass, but once they had called it a fumble, it was going to stay. That was definitely a play stands, not a play confirmed. Alabama puts the touchdown together, and then hey. Here's the deal. Those 4 plays, 75 yards, Stetson Bennett throws down the field on all of them, completes after a sack, completes a pass on 2nd and 18, 40 yards for the touchdown. So, you criticize him when he throws pick sixes in the SEC championship game. I think you got to give him credit for stepping up when he has the opportunity to. But I'll tell you what, if Alabama put the ball in the end zone 2 or 3 times when they had the opportunity, then Stetson Bennett doesn't have an opportunity. And if Georgia, we kept texting each other through the game that if Alabama can just get a touchdown here, it'll be too much. They'll have to put the ball in Bennett's hands. And when they put the ball in Bennett's hands, they get in trouble. And really, it was a tale of 2 games. You look at this game, Bryce Young threw 57 times. Stetson Bennett only threw 26. I think in the SEC championship game, Bennett threw like 45 or 46 times. And so that flipping, allowing Bennett to be the game manager who could then step up and make a couple of big plays, meant that Georgia had an opportunity. If Alabama had played better offensively, and certainly having Jamison Williams would have helped, but if Alabama had played better offensively, then I think we'd be having the same story again, which is that Georgia decided not to play, or has struggled to have an elite quarterback there behind center. They had enough, right? I mean, this was an elite defense, and that elite defense, they were able to get it done. This sort of reminds me, I always think it's kind of cheap when you come back and beat the team that beat you like 2 games earlier to win the national championship, but I can't say too much about that because Florida's done that before. So, hey, it doesn't come around. It doesn't come around very often. So Georgia, once every 40 years, we'll tip our cap to you and say congrats and see you in Jacksonville next year. Cause end of the day, it sucks, but hey, one of the outgrowths of this is, I think, that the recognition by the University of Florida in terms of what they have to do to compete with these two behemoths came this year, right?
Mhm.
I think they saw it. It became very clear when you saw the game against LSU and the game against Georgia and the game against South Carolina that it wasn't just a different coach and a different voice that was needed, that they needed to change the program. And, Kirby Smart took a program that under Mark Richt was very good and has turned it into an elite program and now a championship program. And the hope is that Billy Napier will be able to come in and take a program that under Dan Mullen, for the most part, was very good and take that into an elite program. And you think about where Mark Richt used to recruit, it was in that 6 to 9 range, right? And Kirby Smart came in and said, no, we're just gonna sign 5-star guys every year. And so Napier has the blueprint. We've seen it now both at Alabama and at Georgia. And there's no reason Florida can't do it. They're in the exact same conference. There's more talent in the state of Florida than there is in the state of Georgia. So from an advantage standpoint, Florida's there. They just have to have the commitment to spend the money and put the infrastructure in place to do it. And it looks like they're doing that. So, look, I would prefer that Alabama had won, obviously, because then we could still make jokes. But at the end of the day, I think you got to respect what Kirby Smart's built up there. And the reality is when Florida gets back on top, they will have earned it. Just like now that Georgia won this, they earned it, right? They beat Nick Saban. And so, just like when Clemson beat Alabama, that was a big deal because they beat Alabama. And the best two teams played each other this year. And hopefully Florida can get into that echelon in the next couple of years as Napier builds a program in Gainesville.
Yeah, and to your point, Kirby's record against Bama is still abysmal. However, you put yourself in position time and time again, and it's going to go your way eventually. So good on Kirby, good on the Dogs for getting it done. But that's about all I got to say about that. And I got a collector's item over here. Will, you want to?
Always, my timing is terrible. So that's pretty much the way it goes.
When can we update this to 2021? Can we get that update going?
I don't know. I might need to do that and then sell it to Georgia fans.
Yeah,
but we'll see. Anything to make a buck.
Yeah, that's
I am definitely not above doing things that'll just make me money. So,
yeah, let's move on from 4-bit. Let's move on to 4-bits as quick as possible.
Let's delete that from the show, please.
Yeah, we acknowledged it. We moved on. We said our piece. Let's move on to 4-bits here. We'll talk about Billy Napier reeling in another big time commit, this time from Trevor ETN, the 4-star running back, 5'9", 218 pounds out of Jennings, Louisiana. He selected the Gators over Clemson, Alabama, Arkansas, and Auburn. Of course, he's the brother to former Clemson running back Travis ETN, who had all those great years with Trevor Lawrence, the first-round pick with the Jags. Unfortunately, had an injured season. I feel like I find a way to bring the Jags up once a show, and it brings me down immediately. But anyway, moving on here. I watched a little bit of film on him. It appears to be a multi-purpose weapon out of the backfield. So, he's going to catch. He can catch the ball. He's got good hands downfield. Could be an impact in the passing game. But he's a powerful runner, and he has good burst and acceleration. He can really kind of slow down, make a cut, get around a guy. Looks to be like really the full package there from out of the backfield. Returned punts and kicks as well in high school. So. Maybe unlike being buried down on the depth chart like we've seen with Bowman and Lingard the last couple of years, maybe he can get in there and make a special teams impact. And Lord knows we need something on that. Henderson can fly when he gets going, but I didn't see too many big returns in the punt game and the kick game this year. So maybe he could have an impact on that special teams.
Yeah, we'll see. I'm kind of hoping to see Finley Graham back there. That was something that he had done in high school, and certainly I think people were sort of clamoring for that this year, especially considering, Xavier Henderson did a good job on punt returns in terms of not making mistakes. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that was striking about that national championship the other night was how much talent was out there on the field on special teams, and how, there was just a ton of speed out there. And so anytime you can get a guy who's physical and who's fast out there on special teams, I think you want to do it. The big thing about ETN, I think, is that if you look at the recruiting classes for Florida's running backs, Yeah, Lingard from 2018. You got Naquan Wright from 2019, and you got Demarcus Bowman from 2020. You got nobody from 2021, and now you've got Trevor ETN from 2022. That's a big deal to bring in a high school guy in 2022. He's going to get an opportunity to play and play a lot in the next 2 or 3 years, right? I mean, he might not see the field a ton as a running back here in 2022. But beyond that, he's going to have to be a big part of what they do because there is that hole in the 2021 class. And if DeMarcus Bowman is as good as everybody thinks he can be, then he's going to be one of the guys who leaves early. So you're left with needing to fill that void. And that's actually, it's one of the things I've been doing the last few days is breaking down the overall roster, not only just with all the transfers and portals and all that sort of stuff, but also just where are their holes? And if you look at where there are holes, like in 2021, that class, there's a gaping hole at the running back position where they just didn't sign anybody. And then the year before they didn't sign anybody either, they get Bowman to transfer in. And so you lose sort of that year of development as you have them transfer in. The other place where there's sort of a gaping hole is the buck position, or, you think about defensive end. And then, but they were very, very heavy then in linebacker, cornerback, and safety. So you've seen Napier sort of build in areas where he thinks the organization is weak. And really, when you think about the 3-star depth recruits, that's been on the offensive line, that's been at tight end a little bit, though that was a 4-star with Tony Livingston, though he was an offensive lineman quite a bit in high school. And now you got ETN coming in there at the running back position. I'd expect him to add a wide receiver and a quarterback at least to this class. But, again, I think this fills a hole as well as filling a hole with a guy who's a 4-star blue chip recruit. And, one of the things I think is interesting is if you look at the listings for Lingard and Bowman and then Naquan Wright, they're all relatively small guys. They're in that 185, 190 pound range. And you just mentioned that ETN is a bigger dude. And so you think about Malik Davis and Damian Pierce being sort of a nice change of pace and each having different skills. I think probably you're looking at the same thing here with ETN and some of the other guys on the roster. So, maybe he gets a lot of playing time in 2022 just because he's different. He's a change of pace. And when they need a guy to pass protect, having a guy who's 220 in there to pass protect versus a burner who's, 190, 195 pounds can make a difference in the SEC considering the size of those guys coming around the edge. Certainly if Will Anderson starts flying around the edge, it helps to be 220 as opposed to being 190. That's for sure.
Well, we know this roster is in no way, shape, or form set still with plenty of guys out there in the transfer portal still, and you got big recruiting weekend coming up too, which we'll get to in a little bit here. But let's move on to 6 bits and talk about Rob Sale coming in as the offensive coordinator. Him and Napier have connected at 3 different stops prior to Florida. This will be their 4th stop together. They coached at Alabama together. Rob Sale, LSU offensive lineman under Nick Saban. So that's how he got into the Saban tree. They coached together at Alabama. Napier brings him out to Arizona State with him. He was the offensive coordinator. Sale was his offensive line coach and running game coordinator when Napier got the job at Louisiana in 2018. He brought Sale out with them to be the offensive coordinator and offensive line coach, with the position he held until 2020, when Joe Judge, another former colleague from Alabama, came knocking and asked if he could shore up a New York Giants offensive line, which was not good. Did not go well this year. Lots of injury-prone issues up there. Not much went well for the New York Giants this year. Jake Fromm ran some unbelievable quarterback sneaks, the other day. So that offensive line got a real push on that one. But other than that, not so good this year for the New York Giants. He comes down to Florida. He will be the offensive coordinator and offensive line coach. Billy Napier is actually going to call plays. Sale is going to coach with Daryl Stapleton. So the two of them will be working together on that offensive line in addition to his offensive coordinator duties. Sale comes into the program. He's widely regarded as an excellent developer of offensive line talent. They produced Robert Hunt in the 2nd round of 2020, Kevin Dotson in the 4th round 2020 as well, both products out of ULL. And current ULL tackle Max Mitchell he played 3 years under Sale at Louisiana. He is expected to be drafted this year too. So this is a guy that's coming in. We've had our concerns about the offensive line for several years now, particularly the recruiting and development between Stapleton and Sale. I think you've really addressed that need, and I think the offensive line should be a strength going forward.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see, right? I think there's obviously an advantage to having two offensive line coaches. The fact that Napier is the guy calling the plays, and certainly, Sale has the offensive coordinator title, but is going to be more involved in game planning, and then Napier is going to be calling the plays during the week on the weekend, right? I mean, he's on Saturdays. It's going to be Napier calling the plays. Sale's going to help him sort of figure out what that script's going to be and figure out how to attack the defense. But at the end of the day, that's Napier's show. And so having two guys focused on the offensive line, considering that the issues that Florida's had running the ball, and considering how much Napier wants to run the ball, I think is a significant advantage. In fact, Napier even called it a strategic advantage, having two guys at offensive line. So you can have guys working with the tackles and guys working with the guards and centers. In fact, I think Urban Meyer did that back when he was head coach. I want to say that Hevesy wasn't the only offensive line coach that Florida had. That Hevesy was coaching either tight ends, or he was coaching tackles, and then somebody else was coaching guards. But beyond that, I think the interesting thing about Sale is that he's seen Saban build twice, and the one that I think is probably more pertinent to Florida is the build at LSU. And, that was one where Saban came in from Michigan State, built that program up into a national power in a 3-year period. And if you think about where LSU was under Jerry DiNardo, they were not a very good team. And then 3 years later, you're sitting there as a Florida fan watching LSU whip you going, geez, what happened here? And, it turns out they had the best coach ever who came down and took over. But we didn't really know that yet. Right. And so, but he's seen that. He's seen how Saban operates in that framework, which is really kind of where Napier is now, right? I mean, Napier's had 4 years at Louisiana. Now he's coming to the SEC to show what he can do and show what he's learned. And Saban had a few years at Michigan State and then came down to LSU. And it was one of those things where it's a prove it opportunity. So we'll see. I mean, the reality is everybody on this staff has, for the most part, everybody on this staff has some connection to Alabama in some capacity. We've heard that Napier is extraordinarily process oriented, that he learned a lot of stuff from Nick Saban. So it's not a surprise that he's got guys who've been former Saban staffers and people who sort of followed him around and have bought into his philosophy or the journey and, the 8 sort of principles that they're going to have for all the different players, and having everybody move in the same direction, I think is an important part of things. But, I'm torn when it comes to the assistants, because I look at it and I go, yeah, it's important. I realize it's important, but I didn't know who Sale was until 2-3 months ago. Right. I mean, you're sitting there looking at it going, okay, I mean, maybe if I was a Giants fan, maybe I would have known. And if Georgia had decided to bring down Sale as their offensive line coach, I'm sure I would have been poking holes in his resume and making fun of the QB sneaks and the New York Giants offensive line not getting any better and all that sort of stuff. I think the big thing is that everybody looks good with fantastic players. And you think about what they did at Louisiana, Napier brought in better players for Louisiana than anyone else in the Sun Belt. And lo and behold, all of a sudden they've got better teams. Now, I will say at the offensive line, they produced a couple of guys who I think went in the second round of the NFL draft who were under Sale. And then you've got Osiris Torrance, who's going to be somebody who ends up in the NFL, who may end up transferring and knows Sale. And then you got Max Mitchell there at Louisiana as well, who was an elite offensive lineman who's going to end up in the NFL as well. So you think about their track record of bringing in guys and then being able to develop them into NFL players. I think that's encouraging. But Louisiana ain't Florida, and the Sun Belt ain't the SEC. And so we'll see what he can do. I think the proof is in the pudding with all this stuff. I mean, at the end of the day, we saw Napier go into IMG and bring in a recruit. That's new. And so you sit there and go, okay, that's impressive. And when Sale has an offensive line that can dominate in the fourth quarter, then we'll say, okay, that's new. We haven't seen that before. And that's going to be the test, right? Is that the offensive line progressively got worse in each of the years that Dan Mullen was at Florida. And we want to see the offensive line progressively get better under Sale. And the hope is that we'll see that under Sale and Stapleton, and that an increased level of attention on that position, but also an increased accountability. Right. If you're one of 4 guys sitting in a room reviewing tape, as opposed to one of 8 guys sitting or 10 guys sitting in a room reviewing tape, then you're going to have to answer to that tape a little bit more. And so hopefully the accountability, you wouldn't get away with 9 false starts if you got 2 offensive line coaches. I'd have to say that probably isn't going to happen. And so I'm encouraged, but I'm also hesitant to say too much, because I think you can poke holes in his resume. I think you can say he's got a really good resume in other places. And the reality is it's all going to come down to the quality of player that they bring in, both from a talent perspective, but also from a person perspective. Can you bring guys in who want to learn, will be held accountable, and then are elite players to begin with? And if you can combine all three of those things, then everybody's going to look back and go, wow, that was an awesome hire.
I do like that he was with Napier for the build at Louisiana there for 3 out of 4 years. Correction, I'd said Daryl Stapleton, Darnell Stapleton. Correction on that. I do like the pairing with Stapleton though, as the 2-0 line coaches. And I mean, the resume is there for the guy. The NFL experience is nice. Stapleton, NFL player. So you go out on the recruiting trail, you got 2 NFL guys talking to people for the offensive line. I like that. I also like the quote from Sale. They asked the media before he left, asked him the difference between coaching the NFL and college football. He said, well, in one, you get to pick your groceries, and one you don't. So I did.
like another New York Giants coach who used to talk about picking groceries.
Bill Parcells, right? He had that great quote years ago. They won't let me. They want me to cook the meal, but I don't get a shot for the groceries, right?
It's interesting because, and Alabama's a little bit of an outlier, but Alabama has just churned coaches over the last decade, and Napier's part of that, right? But they've just churned coaches over the past decade, and the recruiting classes are always identical. It's always the best in the country, and that has a lot to do with Nick Saban. Right. And it was the same thing. Like when Urban Meyer went up to Ohio State, immediately the recruiting jumped. And when Urban Meyer came to Florida, immediately the recruiting jumped. And it turns out that if you're good at recruiting as a head coach, one, you probably hold everybody else accountable. But two, if I'm a big time recruit, I don't want to talk to the position coach other than kind of figuring out, do I get along with him? I want Napier to be the guy who's showing me the love, calling me, and that sort of stuff. And going back to the ETN commit, there was that story on Inside the Gators that talked about, him not even having Greg Knox's phone number. And when the Gators dialed him up, they're like, oh, we didn't think we had a shot with you. And it's like, okay, there's a reason why some of those guys haven't gotten hired yet, I guess, at least at the college level. And, so it's not we're talking about an upgrade here, but how far do we really need to go? And these guys are bringing in top 10 classes with those sorts of shenanigans going on. If there's just organizational awareness within a program, right? You think about the hirings of Katie Turner and some of those people, like one of their main jobs is to make sure that every recruit has the phone numbers that they need. So anyway, I go back to what I was saying earlier with Saban. At the end of the day, Napier's going to be the guy who decides the quality of the player that comes in. He's going to be the guy who has to close the deal. And I think one of the reasons why Florida struggles is Mullen was not that guy. And you look at Georgia, and Smart's that guy. You look at A&M, and Jimbo's that guy, or at least the people setting up the NIL deals there at A&M are that guy. And then, we'll see in terms of LSU. I don't think Brian Kelly's going to be all that much better than Orgeron. And if he keeps wearing that purple suit, I just can't imagine that he's going to bring in better classes than Billy Napier. So at the end of the day, I think Sale's a good hire. I think the combination of 2 offensive line coaches with Stapleton makes a big difference. I think an increased emphasis on that particular position is going to be a welcome change for Florida. But at the end of the day, it's going to be, who does Napier bring in? And are they quality players? And can they take elite athletes and make them full, honest, real, all SEC level linemen? And we'll see. That's 2 or 3 years out, right? We won't really know until they've got a full class, that 2023 class coming in.
I like the Brian Kelly jokes too, Will, but LSU, it's a little scary if you think about it. This is going to be the first time since Nick Saban was there that there's going to be not a crazy person as their head coach.
I don't know, man. Have you seen
what can LSU do with not a crazy person as their head coach?
So I'm gonna have to be careful here because I don't know the details of the situation, but or the many situations. But I would say that Brian Kelly, based on his past behavior, does not strike me as a non-crazy person. He just strikes me as somebody who's at Notre Dame and has not necessarily gotten all the attention that somebody like Les Miles in the SEC does. This is the same guy who completely butchered a joke about murdering his team earlier this year. This is the same guy who wears the Joker suit and dances around with his quarterback recruit like an idiot. This is the same guy who, is had to sort of reinvent himself in terms of like not being a complete a-hole to all of his recruits and all of his players after they had a 4-8 season one year. So I think Brian Kelly's probably going to do a pretty good job at LSU. I don't think he's not crazy. I think that's a false definition. He's just not eating grass and Farmer Franning.
That's what I mean. I mean, like the insane type of crazy. I mean, all these guys are some type of crazy. You got to be some type of crazy to be in this business. But I mean, like the Les Miles and Ogeron type of crazy. There's a relatively stable individual at the head coaching position for the first time in a long time. I don't know. LSU could be kind of scary, man.
He can have fun getting beat like a drum by Alabama and Texas A&M every year, because that's what's coming for LSU.
I'm not giving Jimbo that. Yeah, he's got to earn that. He's
I'm not giving him Alabama, but I'm going to give him LSU. I think he's going to beat them like a drum coming up the next 3 or 4 years.
He didn't beat him this year. When they were trying to hire him. So that'll be interesting to see, though. One more note on the recruiting front there. We were talking about you were talking about not having phone numbers for ETN. I heard a story. Blake Alderman, I believe, was on on one of the recruiting podcasts for 24/7, and he was talking about Napier, the differences with Napier at Florida. And they were talking about Kamari Wilson, where Wilson had a lot of interest in Florida, but they just weren't contacting him nearly enough. And then Napier staff gets in there, and you just keep hearing story after story about the former staff. It just seems like it's night and day from what's going on from when Mullen was here in the recruiting operation. I'm just going to put it that way.
Absolutely. I think there's an organization and a structure that was not there previously. And part of that is just,
that's not just us fans getting excited, right? Like we're actually, the real results are showing because,
dude brought somebody home from IMG. Right. I mean, at the end of the day, you start looking, he's got 3 top 100 guys who committed, and he had the confidence to allow some of the people who were already committed to walk. Right. You look at some of the guys like Nick Evers and some other people. Evers may turn out to be a great quarterback for Oklahoma, but the reality is Napier looked at that and said, the relationship isn't where I want it to be, or I don't know what happened in that relationship, but at some point they just decided, all right, it's time to go our separate ways. And Napier's confident enough in himself to say, look, I'm not going to change my principles in order to sweet talk a recruit. At the same time, you could look at that and say, you should have sweet talked the recruit. We need the quarterback in the class. So, we'll see what comes of all that sort of stuff.
You're wanting another quarterback in addition to Jack Miller? You're not counting Jack Miller as that quarterback?
Well, I think if you look at the history of programs, one of the things that you do need to do is you need to bring in a quarterback every year. And the problem, and in fact, if you look fundamentally at Will Muschamp's recruiting, one of the big problems is that he had Jeff Driscoll and then who else did he have? Somebody. Well, you want was
Tyler
it Brissett?
Murphy? Was Murphy later?
No, was Brissett in the same? Brissett was in the same class.
Brissett was. So he transferred out pretty quickly, though.
Yeah, but that's the problem, right? You bring in a guy like Brissett and a guy like Driscoll. Driscoll wins the job, and then Brissett ends up transferring out. That tends to be something that happens quite a bit. You saw it with Greer and Treon, right? Those guys were very close in terms of their class, and obviously, if Greer hadn't gotten popped for steroids, then you would have had Treon transferring out. One of the benefits of having Trask in the year they brought him in is that Trask wasn't going to go anywhere. Right. That was one of the things I was wondering whether Florida did last year when they brought in Jalen Kitna along with Carlos Del Rio Wilson. Is okay. Del Rio Wilson is the 4-star guy, 146th ranked overall. Jalen Kitna is the guy we're bringing in as the developmental prospect who, if Wilson leaves or if Wilson leaves early or if Wilson doesn't work out, we've got backup to do that. So, yeah, I think it's worthwhile bringing in a quarterback for this class. I think you want to touch just about every position in every recruiting class, because what you don't want is you don't want holes. Now, maybe you can fill holes with the transfer portal a little bit now in the way you couldn't before. But the reality is if you're constantly trying to patch holes, you're going to bring in people who either don't fit your culture or don't fit your team or just don't work out for whatever reason. And all of a sudden you're left with the same hole, but you've made some sacrifices from a scholarship perspective and from a high school recruiting perspective to bring that person in. But the reality is Florida only has 7 scholarships left. I'm actually a little bit surprised that Emory Jones is still there, because using the words processing has a negative connotation, but it's not a surprise to me that exactly 7 guys went into the transfer portal for Alabama the day after the national championship game. Guarantee you Saban had some conversations with some people about playing time and said, there's this NCAA rule where we get to replace 7 people in the transfer portal with 7 recruits coming, or with 7 people in the transfer, that it doesn't count against our initial counters for high school recruiting if we just replace people who transfer. Yeah, okay, we'll let you go. Right. Like there's some cutthroat aspect to football and football recruiting that I think is just the reality. And at the end of the day, like I found it really amusing that everybody was like, oh, it's a mass exodus from Alabama. I'm like, no, 7's kind of an important number, because once you get to 8, you get penalized for bringing in a replacement for number 8. You don't get penalized for bringing in replacements for the first 7. And so turns out Nick Saban's playing chess while everybody else is playing checkers once again, because that number means something, and it's amusing to see that it's exactly at the number that allows him to maximize everything on his roster.
Well, let's move on to a dollar, because you brought up Emory Jones, and I wanted to talk about touch on a few roster updates. I was going to save Emory for last, but we'll bump it up to first here. What's the latest on his status? He has not officially entered the transfer portal, even though he initially announced his intention to transfer. What's going on there? Do you think he's sticking around till spring ball and see where he ends up falls under Napier? And if he doesn't get the job or doesn't have a shot at it, then he transfers after spring ball? Or do you think he's going to transfer sooner than later?
I mean, I think that sounds like what's going to happen. He obviously showed up to the meetings. He's going through everything he needs to go through, probably finishing up his degree, or maybe even finishing up a graduate degree at this point. And, if he likes Gainesville, and he seems like one of those guys who sort of finishes what he commits to. And so, if Napier said it's an open competition, if you win it, you win it. Why not? Right. I mean, because if you transfer, you're going to have the same issue where you got,
has
where
he
you
graduated?
I mean, he's going to be a redshirt senior this year. I suspect he has.
Well, I was going to say maybe he's sticking around to get his degree in the spring, and then
no, I think one of the things is, if you look at it, guys like Spencer Rattler and guys like Caleb Williams, like and Dylan Gabriel, those are guys who can transfer and are going to have, and know when they go in the portal, they're going to have an immediate suitor at a Power 5 program. I don't think you can say that about Emory Jones. I think his options. One of the things you've actually seen recently is that guys go into the transfer portal, and it's one of the reasons they have that 7-man transfer rule in terms of counters, is they don't want people getting stuck in limbo in the transfer portal. But the minute you go in the transfer portal, your current program can pull your scholarship. And so, there's a risk associated with going into the transfer portal. And seeing where you stand after spring practice, you still have the ability to go into the transfer portal at that point and find an organization. And in fact, there's probably more open quarterback positions at the end of spring practice than there would be right now, right? Because at the end of the day, you've got the recruiting isn't finished. You may end up and you've even seen this, right? If Caleb Williams decides to come back to Oklahoma, and then you've got Gabriel who transferred in, like what is that? What does that look like for Gabriel? Like at that point, he's like,
Gabriel transferred in from UCF after almost starting classes at UCLA. He was committed to UCLA. First day of class at UCLA, pulls out of class, transfers to Oklahoma. Double transfer in the transfer portal. Like that move.
Right. So, I mean, again, if you want certainty about where you're going, and if I'm Emory Jones, I'm sitting there going, I have to weigh the value of having a full spring practice with my new team versus the value of having certainty that when I go where I'm going to go, that I'll be able to be the starter. And, you'll know way more about that at the end of the spring than you will right now. And so maybe that's part of it. And maybe part of it is he just wants to ride out Napier and see what Napier says is true. And, look, he won the job last year, and I know we were all clamoring for Anthony Richardson, but Emory Jones won the job last year. If he wins the job under Napier, then, hey, maybe he thinks he's got an opportunity to win the job. And if Napier says, we want you around, then you say, hey, I'll ride it out here because I like this place. And maybe he liked what he heard. And, at the end of the day, he's one of the leaders of the team, definitely. And so I think that's an important place for Napier to get buy-in if he's going to stay for 2022.
Well, a player that is in the transfer portal has already declared. Linebacker Mahmoud Diabate, Florida's second leading tackler this past season, announced that he would be transferring to Utah for the 2022 season. He said, I appreciate all all the fans of Gator Nation and the support throughout my time here in Gainesville. I will always be a Gator. The I will always be a Gator. I understand what that means in your heart, but Utah is playing at Florida to open the season in 22, Will. So Gator Nation will have an opportunity to continue to appreciate him on September 3rd when Utah comes to town.
Yeah, you suspect he'll be pretty jacked for that one. I think he'll be excited about it. It's not quite as bad as Flanders Fleming celebrating UGA's championship on Instagram the other night, the Florida basketball player. But
where do you come down on that? I've seen some debate on Twitter on that, and I don't even know how it's a debate. You're a University of Florida athlete, dude. Come on, I don't care that. I don't care that you're from Athens. Like, you cannot be putting that on social media.
Well, so there are things that you can do and things you should do. It's the old Ron White. I had the right to remain silent, but I didn't have the ability. I think I think that's one of those things where you have the right to root for your team, but
I'm not saying he doesn't have the right. I'm just saying it should. Like, what are you thinking, guy? Like,
well, put it this way: Gainesville Nissan is not figuring out how to give the guy a name, image, and likeness deal right now. Look, I understand why people want their athletes to be completely bought in, but let's be honest. I mean, at the end of the day, a lot of people choose Florida or a lot of people choose Georgia for selfish reasons, right? They want to get to where they need to get to. And, when I grew up in Indiana, it's not as though I was a Florida fan. In fact, I was enamored because I hated Notre Dame so much. I was enamored with some of those Charlie Ward Florida State teams that came in there and gave Notre Dame crap all the time. And that 1993 team for Florida State was a team that I really enjoyed watching. Now, once I decided to once I looked at the educational capabilities or the educational possibilities when I moved down to Florida, and it became clear that one institution was significantly better than the other, I said, all right, well, now I'm a Gator because I'm going there. And and my loyalties were no longer divided. At the same time, this guy's a transfer in, hasn't been here for very long. And so I understand how you could have dual loyalties. The thing and this was always the thing with Mullen all year long, is that Mullen didn't have to like prostrate himself at those press conferences. He just had to not be a complete malcontent, right? Like, you just have to answer the questions and do the coach speak stuff, and everybody will be fine. But when somebody asks a recruiting question and you glare at them and you go, we'll deal with that during recruiting season, when your recruiting is terrible, it makes a mountain out of a molehill. And I think that's kind of what you're seeing here, is that all the Florida fans that I know were all rooting for Alabama. And so if you have any feel for the pulse of the university, then you're like, okay, I know I'm from Athens. Maybe I'll text my buddies who are Florida fans, but I'm not going to put it on social media.
But you know what Georgia thinks of Florida as well. If you're from Athens and you understand that culture and everything else, like, hey, look, I grew up from Ohio, grew up a Buckeye fan, Buckeye grads all in the family and everything. Grew up watching Buckeye football, but I was in school when Florida and Ohio State played in the national title, both the basketball and the football. You can bet that I didn't wear a single Ohio State thing around campus during that time period at all. And I didn't even, I went to the game, loyalty tested it, had my orange and blue on, and it wasn't even a question. That was crazy to me. That story that people are out there. Yes, he has the right to do that, obviously.
Well, I mean,
I have a right to think what I want to think then.
My first reaction was, anybody's paying attention to the Florida basketball team? That was sort of my first reaction.
Yeah, I'll just continue not watching. I'll just continue not watching.
Well, I lost LSU tonight, so we're back in the Mike White camps in each direction already. So it wouldn't be a basketball season if they weren't inconsistent and losing games they shouldn't. So,
well, let's move on to another player who transferred out. This actually announcement just came down today, I believe. Kamar Gamble, tight end. He posted today, I have a huge opportunity to enter the 2022 NFL draft. But after lots of prayer and talking with my parents and loved ones, I have decided to enter my name into the transfer portal for my last year of eligibility. As much as it hurts to leave the University of Florida, I feel this is the best decision for me right now. I look forward to the opportunities ahead, but I'll always be a Florida Gator. This was our third leading receiver on the team. We also lost the leading receiver with Jacob Copeland. 31 catches, 414 yards, and a team leading 4 touchdowns. Will, how's tight end looking next year without Gamble?
Not too bad. I mean, you've got Keon Zipper from that 2019 class. You've got Jonathan Odom from the 2020 class. You got Gage Wilcox and Nick Elksness, and all accounts, that Elksness was really doing a nice job in camp last year. And in true Dan Mullen era fashion, they just didn't play him during the year. And then you've got Tony Livingston coming in, that's sort of a freak athlete, but a little bit of a project there at tight end as well. So you think about, sort of what I said about running back, that there are open spots where they didn't recruit in the past. That's not true at tight end. Now, Gamble, obviously 31 catches this past year. And then even the year before had 10 catches, but that was with Kyle Pitts in front of him. And so really he was sort of the blocking tight end, or he was the option when Pitts went out or was injured. So against LSU, against Georgia, in those two games specifically, but a very effective player. I don't think he was a star. But I think it was something where, especially with some of the limitations that Florida had on the offensive line and at quarterback, that he was a significant weapon for Emory Jones this year. But, the reality is I think from a physical gifts standpoint, Keon Zipper is a more gifted player, but has gotten a lot less playing time than Gamble. And that's the kind of thing we're going to see. It's the same thing I said with Emory Jones, right? Is that we were all clamoring for Anthony Richardson. We saw what Anthony Richardson could do. But the question was always, and question still is going to be, can he do it consistently? And you're going to say the same thing about Keon Zipper. I think we know exactly what we were getting from Kamari Gamble. I think it was a effective tight end, but I don't think it was a game-changing tight end. And so I think you can replace him with the people that you have on the roster, but certainly wish him well. And he's given his all to the program. And, that's one of those guys where you say, hey, I'm glad he was a Gator, and I'll be rooting for him wherever he goes. Yeah. Because he gave it his all. And at the end of the day, when you have changes in coaching staffs, you're going to have attrition. And so just like Chris Bogle going to Michigan State, you wish him well. Same thing with Kamari Gamble and wherever he ends up.
Yep, Gamble and Diabate, both solid players for this team the last few years, and wish them nothing but the best going forward. A couple other updates, Will, here. Kyer Elam declared for the draft this past week. According to Pro Football Focus, Elam allowed only 53 receptions for 636 yards across 114 career targets and coverage for Florida. So basically, it's a completion percentage given up of 46.5%. And that is considered elite for a college cornerback. I know at times he struggled. There was talk about injuries for him this past year. Look, at time when he's performing at a high level, he certainly is capable of elite corner play. Although we did see some moments this year that had us wondering if he was potentially coming back. I don't think that coming into the season, I think it was a lot of people were confident that he was going to be a first round pick in the 2022 draft. Not so confident in that assessment now, and he'll have to ball out for the combine and everything for that to happen. But probably at least a day 2 pick in the second or third round, bare minimum.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, he's going to make some money. And so you look at that and say, okay, I understand it. It's different than a guy like Zachary Carter coming back, who was probably like a 6th or 7th round pick last year. Mm-hmm. He's probably moved himself up into the 3rd or 4th. And if he has a big combine, maybe he even ends up in the 2nd round. You got a guy like Elam. I think he's probably like mid-2nd round minimum, just based on his history of the last 3 years. And then, if he has a strong combine performance, can move himself up. Now that is a far cry. I mean, if you're the 45th pick in the draft versus the 12th pick in the draft, that's a lot of money that you're leaving on the table. And so the thought of him coming back was, if he can have a year where he's healthy, if the defense can have a year where it really takes a step up from what they had under Todd Grantham, then you get an opportunity to sort of jump into that top 20, the top 10. And the cornerback position is one where teams prioritize in the NFL and teams pay in the NFL, which, again, it's sort of a 6 to 1, half a dozen the other. Like, you were injured this year, so maybe you were a little bit less effective. At the same time, you were injured, and so you understand that injuries happen in college, and why would you risk the injury in college when you can go to the pros and get paid right away? It's a little bit different for a guy like Dameon Pierce, because Pierce also, going to the NFL. But for Pierce as a running back, that's one of those things where a lack of wear on the tires is valuable. And an elite guy doesn't end up, like, you have to be truly elite to end up being a 1st round draft pick. Like, to play yourself into a 1st round draft pick, you're going to have to put up like a 1,500 yard season and, average, 6 or 7 yards a carry. Probably not happening for Pierce. I'm not sure he's that kind of player. he's a good player. I just don't think he's that elite. He's not Adrian Peterson. And so, he'll be a second, third, fourth, fifth round draft pick, but I don't know that he was going to improve that by coming back for his super senior season. And so get out there while you can get that second contract. And, and same thing for Elam, right? I mean, at the end of the day, if he performs when he gets to the NFL, that second contract will be lucrative. And, hopefully he gets drafted high anyway. And the first contract's lucrative as well.
You think Pierce could get drafted as high as day 2?
I think so.
I think that sounds pretty high. I would have had him more like, I got to think more like just because running backs too, they have not been going crazy on the running backs either. I kind of think he's a 5th to 7th round pick somewhere in there.
Maybe, but I mean, I guess the thing is I think we know what his skill level is. And, maybe he shows something at the combine that makes people think, okay, we'll move that up. But at the end of the day, he's not a guy who's going to take it to the house. This isn't Dalvin Cook. And, but it's also not, some schlub. He's a good player. So if somebody falls in love with him, he ends up in the 3rd round. If nobody falls in love with him, he ends up in the 5th. But the reality is that was going to be the exact outcome if he came back this year and played one more season at Florida. I don't think you're going up any higher than the 3rd round. And I don't think you're dropping any more than probably the 5th or the 6th. So, the risk of an injury to a running back is significant. And so I completely understand
Good
why
decision.
he was clear.
Yeah, I could totally see him mixing in as one of Bill Belichick's 7 running backs on the year next year. So he's got a good opportunity ahead of him. Best of luck to Kyrie Elam and Dameon Pierce going forward with their plans for the 2022 NFL draft. Will, that's all we got tonight for Stand Up and Holler. We kept that 2 bits real short for the audience. Try to get through that as painlessly as possible. But any final words tonight before we head out?
We appreciate everybody's support. Certainly, we had over 6,000 people listen to me read my most recent article. So certainly appreciate everybody supporting us over on the YouTube channel. If you want to support us further, you can go over to patreon.com/read and reaction. We have bonus episodes. So tonight's bonus episode, we're going to be recapping the early returns on the Billy Napier era. And then there's other stuff that we put over there on the Patreon channel as well. And we're going to be doing more and more of that as the off season goes. So certainly head over there if you want to support us. We very much appreciate it, but we appreciate you watching anyway. And thanks for all the support.
Commercial free over on Patreon if you join our Patreon too. So if you don't like all the commercials, commercial free over there on Patreon. Thanks to everybody for subscribing. For Will Miles, I'm Nick Knudsen. We'll see you next week. Go Gators. Thank you for watching this episode of Stand Up and Holler. Be sure to subscribe to the Read and Reaction YouTube channel. Join our Patreon community at Read and Reaction for bonus content each week. And check out our website at readandreaction.com. I'm Nick Knudsen, joined by Will Miles. And as always, go Gators.